the people of sake actually brought me into sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Welcome. You are now tuned into what is episode number 16 of Sake on Air, the world's one and only podcast dedicated to the world of sake, shochu, and awamori. Broadcasting bi-weekly from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center here in Tokyo, Japan. My name is Justin Potts, one of several of you regular co-hosts here on the show, and this week we have a special double interview. Two special guests lined up back to back to share their knowledge and experience and stories with you on both the worlds of sake and shochu. Coming up first, our in-house shochu pro, Mr. Christopher Pellegrini, sits down with a Miss Maya Aley. Maya is not only a professional interpreter and translator, she is also the world's very first certified non-Japanese Shochu Meister. Maya shares with us her experience and insights from both the classroom and from behind the bar, as well as chats with Christopher about all of the exciting happenings in the world of shochu and awamori. And then coming up next, Christopher keeps his place behind the mic, and I step in to join him in order to interview Mr. Jamie Graves. Jamie is the Japanese beverage portfolio manager for Skurnik Wines and Spirits in New York, and he has a rather fascinating and exciting personal history with Japan, Japanese restaurants, dining and service, and now a very special place in the world of sake and shochu in New York. He shares with us his stories and experiences, and together we talk about what's happening here in Japan, what's got him on the island, and what we're all excited about for the future. Instead of me just rattling on about what it is you're going to be hearing about in just a few moments anyway, I say, let's get on with the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Sake on Air. I'm your host, Christopher Pellegrini, and I am here, as always, in the offices of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association to bring you another episode of Sake on Air. Today, we're focusing on shochu, and I'm very excited to be able to introduce to all of you a shochu nerd from down south in the shochu homeland, Miss Maya Aley. Maya, thank you for joining us.
Hello, everyone. So very happy to be here.
Maya came over here from the U.S., and she has actually been living in Kagoshima City since 2011. Is that right?
Yes, that's great.
And despite not really being able to read or write Japanese back then, she now spends her days as a bilingual translator and interpreter and a global business communication consultant for local businesses down in Kagoshima and Kyushu, generally speaking, right?
That's right.
And after she spent a few years trying to understand shochu, she decided to jump in with both feet, and she became the first non-Japanese to be certified by the Kagoshima Prefecture Shuzo Kumiai as a shochu meister. Now she spends her nights bartending and drinking shochu at what is one of the most famous shochu bars in the country, a bar that we will also talk about, I hope, named Ishizue. And on nights when you can't find her at the bar, she's probably either traveling solo around the country in search of delicious food or looking for the next stamp in her passport. Maya.
Yes, thank you very much for that very kind introduction.
You're most welcome, and thank you for coming on the show. It's
Yes.
Very exciting for me to be able to talk with a kindred spirit, a shochu lover.
Yes, well,
And-
we talk all the time, but this is like a proper chat.
So can we start with a little bit of, I guess I'll go superhero on you here, of your origin story, Maya?
I really wish that would like make me an X-Men. That would be so cool. So I'm born and raised in the U.S. I did spend a couple years in Japan as a kid with my dad's work, but I don't really remember it. And then I came over to Kagoshima in 2011 as a junior high school English teacher.
Okay.
So I'd never heard of Kagoshima. It's really far away. And then it was actually the year of the tsunami, 2011. So everyone was like, this is not the year to go to Japan. You shouldn't be going over there. But I looked at a map, and it's literally as far away as you can get without being in Okinawa.
Sure.
So all my friends were like, oh, well, in that case, you won't turn into a zombie. You'll be fine. So, and then here I am, still in Kagoshima 7 years later.
Still in Kagoshima, and you're working in kind of an internationally focused firm right now, aren't you?
Yeah. So it was a startup. I spent 5 years doing the English teaching gig. I came over basically illiterate, the most functional illiterate person.
Illiterate in terms of your Japanese
Yeah.
ability.
Oh, yes. I was a properly educated English teacher.
Gotcha. All right.
But Japanese, functionally illiterate. I could hold a conversation, but I couldn't read or write. So it was hard to learn Japanese because I had the opposite skill set of everyone else who had studied Japanese in college, because they could read and write and not speak and listen. So I had the opposite skill set, so it was very interesting kind of settling in. And now I got recruited basically for this startup by my boss, who we had known each other from drinking together.
Yeah.
Shochu, of course.
Of course.
And she's globally minded. She spent a lot of time in the U.S. as a female executive. And she was like, well, I want to do this kind of English business communication. There's a big gap to fill, especially in Kagoshima. Not a lot of people doing English and translation at a reasonable kind of cost, and that's not all computer generated. And there's a lot of business opportunities for people in Kagoshima to go export and for inbound as well. I think Kagoshima just released data that they're the number 2 fastest growing prefecture in terms of foreign employees employment. Like the 1 year increase was number 2 in the country.
No kidding. I did not suspect that.
No, neither did I. So foreign students learning Japanese, as well as foreign laborers, I suppose. So there's a lot of demand for inbound as well.
Okay.
And we have 4 direct flights for being a really small city to international, 4 direct international flights.
That is true.
So there's a lot of people coming in, especially from Hong Kong.
Yeah. So I notice that every time I'm down in Tenmonkan, it's tons and tons of tourists. It's an outsized population of tourists, given everything else that we know about Kagoshima and how hard it is to get to in some ways, although the Shinkansen has connected Kagoshima to the north side of Kyushu since 2011. So.
Yes, the same year. So, but I mean, it takes me the same amount of time to fly to Taipei or Shanghai as it does to get to Tokyo.
Yeah, right.
So.
Yeah, it's not the most conveniently located.
No.
But at least it's not the east side of Kyushu, which is even harder.
So we've got the Shinkansen and the airports nearby. Ish.
Yeah. So how did you get into shochu?
So when I first started working in Kagoshima as a teacher, we'd have all these drinking parties, which is, I mean, you have them in Tokyo and other parts of the country, but in Kagoshima, they're like a separate kind of class of, I don't know, drunken debauchery is not really the word I want to use, but just every week. Like there's 1 year where there's 52 Fridays in a year, and 49 of them I had a drinking party.
No kidding.
I looked through my planner. I was like, oh, that's what happened to all my money this year. So, I had different staff rooms in different schools. So, and I could walk home from Tenmonkan. I lived within walking distance, so I didn't have to worry about the train or the taxi or anything. So there's no reason for me to go home early. I have no idea what's going on because everyone's just speaking Japanese. And the drunker they get, the more Kagoshima Ben, the more stronger the dialect gets. So I had no idea what was going on. It was a lot of fun. And then the more they drink, the more they want to drink shochu.
Right.
Because they might start out with the kanpai beer.
Yep.
But then it just gets into shochu. And I had no idea what was going on. But they were like, drink it. And I'm like, okay, what is it? Oh, this doesn't smell delicious. What is this?
Yeah.
So it took me about a year or 2 to kind of be able to drink it regularly. And we would always go to the same snack is not the really word, but like a snack karaoke bar as a nichikai with a group of teachers. Mm-hmm. And the mama-san, I was the one female teacher who was still there because all the women would always go home earlier. They're like, oh, I have to drink oolong tea and go home to my kids. Okay. And I'm like, well, I don't have kids and I don't want to drink oolong tea, so I'm going to stay drinking. Yeah. And so the mama-san would be like, oh, but you can't drink shochu, so I'll mix it with ryokucha, green tea, for you. And then every time we'd go, because we'd go there every month or every 2 months, she would decrease the level of green tea.
She was weaning you off of it. That's hilarious.
So it's thanks to this mama-san at this bar that I am now able to drink shochu.
Gotcha.
She trained me.
And you're talking specifically about sweet potato shochu.
Yes, imo shochu, yes. The only thing on the menu in most places in Kagoshima.
And I'm sure it was slightly funkier back then.
Well,
And these days I feel like there's a lot more middling, easier to drink,
well,
not so
that's
fragrant shochu.
especially true if you go to bars and stuff. But at the
Sure.
time, our drinking parties would be at hotels
Oh.
or kind of enkaijo. So they'd only have the one or two choices.
Gotcha.
So it would be your shiranami, your satsuma bijin, your
some
kuroi
kuroisa,
sanishiki,
yeah.
your sakurajima.
Okay.
Kind of your mainstay.
The big boys. Okay, so you even had a hard time with those.
Well, because I didn't know what anything was. So they were the big four, but I didn't drink a lot of I drank like vodka and tequila and rum, in college.
Okay.
But, as cocktails,
Yeah.
So very fruity and very sweet. And then I get this clear thing with water in front of me, and I'm like, oh, what is this? And I'm like, oh, this is different.
This is very different from the American palate and perspective. It's
Yeah.
it's kind of a curveball.
Yeah. And I didn't really have experience with whiskey or any kind of slow sipper kind of drinks either.
Gotcha.
So I was like, I don't know what to do with this at all.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
I've heard that before. And in fact, my own reaction to shochu from the very start, at least sweet potato shochu, was like, wow, I have never tried anything like that before.
Yeah.
And I was pretty neutral in my assessment, but it did take me a while to kind of be like, oh, wow, this is way better than I initially thought.
Yeah,
so you
yeah.
did eventually come around.
Yeah.
Yep.
The first couple months, you'd go to a drinking party, and literally the only three options on the menu were beer, oolong tea, and shochu.
Yeah.
And the shochu was the one that they had. It wasn't your choice of shochu. It was just whatever they had. So
Yeah.
there was only three drinks on the menu. And I don't drink beer. I've never really have been able to enjoy beer in any country or any form of beer, which I know upsets you. I'm sorry.
It doesn't upset me. It puzzles me.
Sorry.
It's all right. We've got another guy on the show who doesn't really drink beer.
Well,
Couldn't be
but
here
that
today,
was my way into shochu, because if I couldn't drink beer in oolong tea, I'd be the only sober one at the party, which is okay, but like boring. So I was like, well, I guess I have to drink shochu. It's my only option.
Yeah, welcome. I'm glad you made it safely to
Yes.
the other side of that
Yes.
journey. I want to talk about the Shochu Meister certification. I would love to hear some more
Okay.
about that.
I had heard about this Shochu Meister course. It's run through in conjunction with Kagoshima University, which is the only university in the country that offers shochu as a degree, basically. I think Niigata has the Nihonshu version of it, Niigata University.
Okay.
And so Kagoshima University has this department where they study the microorganisms and fermentation and distillation and all these things. They actually have a mini distillery on campus, which you can tour. I'm sure you've been.
Yes.
Because you know all about it. And I guess you could call it like adult education or continuing education section of the university runs this course geared towards people who, have jobs or, full-time work. So it takes place on Saturdays for 9 months from May to February, and 120 hours of coursework on Saturdays.
That's legit.
Yeah, so it's a proper semester, a term, I suppose. Or maybe it's a whole year. Hour half to 6 hours on Saturday, depending on the schedule. And then we had tastings. We learn about not only shochu, the history of sake, the history of shochu, the history of alcohol like wine and beer, and other kinds of whiskeys, and baiju, the Chinese drink.
Clear spirit, yeah.
Clear spirit. And how shochu compares to those in terms of history and brewing and distillation process. And then, we had people come down from Tokyo to do tastings with us and food pairings, and we did tastings with wine. There's a shochu distillery tour as part of the kind of schedule. Lots of stuff. Mm-hmm. You have to write a report every week.
Every week you have to write a report.
For every lecture, except we also had 9 hours of Chinese and Korean.
Nice.
As an introduction, because that's the main kind of market, I suppose. So
Sure.
At the time, there was no English component. There is now an English component because now they have me to come in and teach the English component.
You're in for the long haul then.
Yeah, I have signed on
You
the dotted
graduated-
line.
You graduated, but now you're part of
Yeah.
the faculty technically.
Yeah, so I do 2 components of English now for this past intake, and next year's intake is already confirmed. So
Nice. Nice.
Everyone
How many
was-
people are in the class right now?
70.
70.
So I was in the 6th cohort. We had 54. And then they increased it to 70 for the 7th cohort.
Wow.
I think the first year they started out with maybe 20 or 30. And half of that are people in the industry.
Yeah.
So I had classmates who were the toji,
Sure.
the distiller, people who work in sales, people who work in different parts of the factory. So we have people in the business and people who work in who own bars, who own restaurants, who own shops and
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah, liquor shops.
Yeah,
and-
people who come down from Fukuoka, Osaka,
That's-
Tokyo.
Wow.
I think now there's a woman who technically her main place of business is Hong Kong, but she's got Kagoshima roots, so she comes in once a month, flies in for business as well, but to take the course.
Wow.
And then if you can't, if you're in Tokyo and you want to take the course, you don't have to come down every week, but you can do the online videos. They
Right,
take video
right.
of all the lectures, watch those, write the report, and then come in on the times that you can. So they do,
They're pretty flexible
yeah,
about it, seems.
they want people from around the country to come in, so
That's
it's
phenomenal.
very
It's
wide.
it's the cream of the crop in terms of certifications, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
I'd heard about it. I've been hearing about it for a couple of years from a person who'd graduated in the 3rd cohort, and she'd been telling me, like, Maya, you like shochu, you should take this course. And I was like, well, I don't know about my Japanese. And when I was still teaching, I didn't really want to have all my Saturdays gone. But then I started working, in this business consulting, and we have, some clients who are in the alcohol business. And I was like, well, it would be good for me to learn more about it properly. And then it was obviously all in Japanese, so I had to listen and read the lectures all in Japanese. Took my notes in English, and then had to write the report again in Japanese.
yeah,
So I spent twice as much time
right.
learning it and inputting it. So it was actually very beneficial in terms of that.
Okay, yeah. I underwent a similar process when I was trying to get through the shochu kikisake shi thing,
Yes.
which was not really a shochu test so much as it was a language test for
Yeah.
me, I'm sure.
Yeah,
you,
yeah, I
'cause you-
took the-
you now hold that
Yeah, I took the
certification as well.
Kikizaki after I took the Meister, because they're like, well, since now you've taken this Meister course, which is, it's you said it's the cream of the crop, but it's only recognized really in Kagoshima. It's not
People don't know about it. It's
Yeah.
kind of
well, so it's Kagoshima University does the coursework, the lecture, and then the test and the approval and the certification come from the Shochu Kumiyai, the
From the-
Shizo Kumiyai.
okay. All right.
So they're the main sponsors, and they kind of provide a lot of the important support for it. So my certificate says I passed the course from Kagoshima University, but I am accredited or certified by the Shizo Kumiyai.
by
So
the
I've got
Kumiyai.
2 different pieces of paper.
That's
So
interesting.
it's kind of cumbersome a little bit to explain as well. Like, well, who's behind it really? And then people in Tokyo, they're like, oh, well, Kikizakeshi, because it's kind of a national or international, is
Sure.
higher up there, isn't it? And I'm like, well,
Not
I don't know.
really.
It depends what you're. I mean, Kikizakeshi, I don't know if you need 120 hours of coursework for that.
No, you definitely don't.
Yeah.
I needed 120,000 hours of kanji work for that
Yeah.
test, but otherwise,
Well, because I took the Kikizakeshi right after having done the Meister course, so
yeah. So
I'd
it was
done all the Japanese.
Yeah,
and,
right.
and I passed, thankfully.
good on you. Nice work. Let's talk a little bit about how shochu, since becoming certified, of course,
Yes.
has become more and more a part of your day-to-day life.
Well, so I mentioned briefly, but my daytime job, I do translating and interpreting. So we do have some clients, Kagoshima-based distilleries who are wanting to export. So they need a lot of information brochures and stuff in English, or Chinese or Korean or whatever language. But I do the English, obviously, and also for inbound, they people who want to come visit and do tours, or all that kind of information. So I've done subtitles for videos that they play on site, and I do newsletters that they send out by email because they have some fans across the world. So,
Okay.
And then now I also started working at a bar.
Yeah,
for fun.
just because you had so much free time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shall we talk about Ishizue?
Yes, absolutely. One of my favorite places in the world. Ishizue, just for the uninitiated, is a phenomenal shochu bar in Tenmonkan, right in the heart of Kagoshima City. It is run by a former kurabito. He's Ikehata-san is the master there, and he knows his stuff. and he is assembling a team of people who also know their stuff, and Maya's part of that team. I'm real curious about what it's like. I haven't been there when you were behind the bar yet.
Once, but I was kind of in the
you were
beginning.
on the other
beginning,
okay,
yeah.
All right, you were down on the other end for much of the time.
So the funny thing about working at Ishizue is I was there as a customer, and Ikehata-san master was like, well, he knows because I'd gone and asked him some stuff when I was going to take the Kikizakeshi because he's certified as an instructor for
Right.
that. And so I passed the course, and I was just there with a friend, and he's like, he knows my boss as well because she goes there. So he was like, are you allowed to take a side job? And I'm like, yeah, why? And he's like, well, do you want to work here? Literally, that's what he asked. Yeah, he's like, I was thinking about putting out an ad for a baito, a part-timer, but your shochu stuff, but you haven't been able to use it or, any practical application other than translating. So you're gonna forget it. So, like, do you want to work here? And they get a lot of, we're listed in TripAdvisor and Lonely Planet and all the kind of travel books. So we do get a lot of foreign visitors.
Right.
So he's like, and you can speak English to them. So, like, win for me, win for you. And I'm like, okay.
No, why not?
And then he texts me, he's like, so can you start today? Like, the next day he texted me. And I was like, no, I have plans. He's like, okay, how about tomorrow? I was like, no, I still have, how about next week? Let's start next week. And then, so it's been a few months, learning the ropes, but there are 1,500 bottles, Megara brands.
1,500 brands of shochu, and all from Kagoshima,
All from
right?
Kagoshima. Most of them are imo. They're a great selection of kokuto from the
Right.
Omami Islands, of
Over
course.
on the side
Can't leave
wall,
them
right?
out. Yeah, can't leave those out. And then some of the rice and mugi ones that are also produced in Kagoshima that people don't really know about.
Yeah.
There are some other ones. And then some rare bottles, some of the Kagoshima gin, the Kagoshima whiskey.
Right.
So,
yeah, new additions to the lineup
yeah.
there.
So
Every time I go, I love going in there because, first of all, I love Ikehata-san. And he is a very good host when I go in there. And it's always like an impromptu tasting that starts. And it's,
if someone comes
it's
in
so
who
much fun.
who knows their stuff, then he is happy to take out the bottles from the back that don't get offered.
No, and he's like, I bet you haven't seen this before. I'm like,
It's
of course I haven't seen that
it's
before.
it's a point of pride, I think,
Yeah.
to bust out something
and
new.
he can surprise me like 5 or 6 times within an hour with stuff. I was like, whoa, I have never seen that. Whoa, I didn't know that. Holy,
Yeah.
he is the sensei.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn from him. Just even knowing what we have on the shelf is a big learning process. It's hard to recommend something if I don't know what we have. So so I
can't
have to
even
spend a lot of
imagine.
time drinking.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, really hard, the responsibility.
I know. He probably didn't explain that to you when,
No, that
when you
was
signed up for
not,
the gig.
no.
No, that was a surprise, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
what a punishment.
I know. Well, yeah, Ishizue. If you're in Kagoshima, Ishizue should definitely be on your list of places to check out. It's
Yeah, and don't worry if you don't speak Japanese. He'll get by. If not, I'm there. 6 days out of 7.
Are you really? Wowzers.
Except today when I'm in Tokyo. Sorry, boss.
No kidding.
Hanging out in Tokyo with Christopher.
That's
He
hilarious.
can't be mad then.
No, hopefully not. Yeah, Ishizue, respect. So, while bartending, you've been there how many months now? 3, 4 months, 5 months? Has it been half a year?
4.
4?
4 or so. Yeah.
Any interesting stories or anything funny you can share with us?
Well, we get actually a lot of people who own or work or are related to a distillery. So it's funny. Sometimes they only want to drink their own stuff because they want to see how it's served, or they want to quality control, or that's what they're used to drinking. And sometimes they are really interested in what everyone else is making. So it's really interesting to see, a president of a distillery or a toji, the head distiller come in and specifically ask for so-and-so Shizo's so-and-so served this way. Because they've heard about it and they haven't tried it, or they're kind of interested in the competition, and it's very kind of the chats you'll have about them, what they think about what's out
you
now.
could probably learn a lot
Yeah.
from those discussions.
Yeah. So I won't be any more specific, but it's
That's
fascinating.
I bet that is. I would love to be a fly on the wall for some
Yeah.
of those discussions.
Yeah. So, they say the good things and they say the bad things, and then you can tell some of them have draw some inspiration, like, oh, this is the flavor. I wonder how they got that flavor out of it. I wonder, they look at the bottle and they kind of see the information, whether it's this kind of koji or this kind of imo, and sometimes it's not written, and so that's like they play the guessing game and back and forth with Ikeratsu-san, the master, about what they think about it and which way is the best way to serve it. Oh, it's really...
I bet that would be amazing.
Yeah. Happens a lot.
I bet it does. Yeah. Every time I go in there, I am introduced to so-and-so from some distillery.
Yeah.
Or so-and-so who is related to the industry in some way.
Yeah.
Or media types. There's sometimes, every time I'm in there, there's somebody from a TV station.
Yeah, it's so the thing about Ishizue is because we have so much shochu from all Kagoshima, it's really good for settai, when they're kind of hosting an out of town guest. And so the media types, they come in, with people from the Tokyo branches of the various, TV stations or newspapers, and they bring their out of town guests, and distillery people bring the same. They have people coming in to visit, and so they bring them in to drink their own shochu, and then a lot of the white collar suits on during the weekdays with their out of town guests. People from local, very powerful companies come in as regular customers, and so every time it's like, oh, shacho, yoroshiku onegaishimasu, you nod your head and you bow and you give a little wave and extra good service, extra smile.
Yeah. Oh man, what's it like dealing with? What are your experiences with international tourists, foreign tourists coming in? How do they react to Kagoshima's drinks?
Well, so recently we've had quite a few Korean people come in, and they know soju, of course.
Yes.
And so they know that it's different, but they don't know how it's different or what's really different about it. So trying to explain that, and I always ask them if they would prefer me to speak in English or Japanese, because some, especially some people have better Japanese than English if English is not their first language.
Yep.
So I always try to keep that in mind. But explaining how it's made or what's different, if they don't know a lot about shochu, is very difficult because there's a lot of technical terms. So how to keep it simple, but also differentiate it from what they know as sake or what they think of Japanese vodka, quote unquote, or whiskey is kind of interesting. And then some people are just, they want to, I'm in Kagoshima and I heard this is the drink, so give me what you got, and they're just open-minded and they don't know any expectations, so that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what are you used to drinking? What kinds of, if people are wine drinkers, then we might give them a sparkling one or mixed with soda. So there's a lot of stuff out there.
Sure.
Wide range of options.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people coming in who are on their way or back from Yakushima.
Yeah,
which is
that's
the
a
World
big draw,
Natural
isn't
Heritage
it?
island. So people going out there hiking, and they have to stay a night, but just based on the ferry and the train times, I guess. So since we're in town, we'll come out for a drink, and then,
my experience as well is that folks from Korea tend to figure out shochu pretty quickly.
Yeah.
They once they get into it, they're like, yeah. I kind of like this. And they're real quick to be like, okay, I kind of get it. Tell me more.
Yeah.
And they enjoy it. They're much quicker to dive in than, for example, a lot of the American guests on.
Well, I think because it's a cousin to what they're used to drinking.
It kind of is.
So the first drink, they're kind of like, I don't know what to ask for, and then you give them the one, and they're like, oh, okay. Compared to this one, I want this, or I want I want it this way, or okay. So they can verbalize now that they understand like the base zero. It's quite good. But we get a lot of European people hiking, or Americans interested in hiking Yakushima, or people who just take the rail pass and go as far south as you can go, which is Kagoshima on the Shinkansen.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, you're right.
I have the rail pass. I can go as much as I want. I'm just going to take it to the end of the line. Well, welcome to Kagoshima.
Welcome to Kagoshima. Yes. 2018 was a really big year for you, it seems, in terms of your shochu life.
Life, yes.
That was your birth year, kind of. And so obviously that's going to be a big part of 2018 for you, but you have all of this insider knowledge now about things that are happening in the industry. What were some things that stuck out for you in 2018 in terms of the shochu industry? Were there any trends that you noticed?
So, in a word, lychee.
Lychee, like the Dayame.
Dayame Yasuda.
Yeah, there's a lot of lychee
Yeah.
coming out.
Shoshinjan Kotowari. A lot of lychee. Which, if you think about how it's produced, basically you ferment or spoil the potato.
Yeah,
Or get as close as you can without ruining it.
yeah.
And to draw out all these esters, and you take a whiff of this, and it's a lychee nectar in a cup, but it's
Yeah.
imo sweet potato shochu.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating. And then the first one, Yasuda came out, and then
Yeah.
they got all these. I don't know if they're copycats is not the word, but obviously they drew inspiration. Like, oh, it's okay to do this now. Like this is we're allowed to do this thing now, because I think before 10 years ago, if someone had produced that kind of shochu, I'd be like, oh, your potato's gone bad.
Yeah, I always, my initial reaction was always that, oh, you had an inordinate amount of rain during
Yeah.
the first half of the growing season this year,
Yeah.
didn't you? Because that's why and the spuds tend to be a little bit smaller if that happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, now it's a goal.
Yeah, and so and people want to draw out these extra scents and aromas and stuff, and market that, because it's very popular with women, especially, who like kind of the fruity drinks, or they don't like the strong traditional emo flavor.
Sure.
So there's a market to be had,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting to see where else they can go with that.
Yeah, and Hamada Shuzo went all in with their
Dayame,
release of
yeah.
Dayame last fall.
Yeah.
What about 2019? Do you have any premonitions, predictions?
I think, and I did kind of rack Ikehata-san's brain about this for a little bit as well, but I think the soda wari, the shochu highball, the tansan, is getting popular.
It is, isn't it?
And so, especially coming out of winter, when in Kagoshima people want to drink a oyu wari with the hot water in winter, but getting into the warmer seasons, I think the tansan, the soda, is going to kind of boom again. And when at Ishizue, when we have customers who only drink shochu highballs,
No kidding.
or who only drink it with soda wari, or who prefer it. Other people are like, oh, I'm really thirsty. I want something refreshing. So can you get me something with soda? And the purists are like, oh, can't do that.
Yeah.
That's not on the list of approved mixers. It's not water or hot water,
Right.
or ice. So some people don't really enjoy that soda flavor, but when you mix it with soda shochu, because it's 25% in Kagoshima, if you want a good level of carbonation, you have to put a good amount of soda in.
Sure.
So if you do a 5 to 5, a half, you either don't have enough carbonation, or you've lost the flavor of the shochu.
Yeah.
So to find a good balance, or shochus that work well with soda, is kind of
Yeah, they don't all work.
Yeah.
I mean,
so we try to serve the higher percentage alcohol, the 30 or the 35s, with the soda, because you can have enough soda for the carbonation to have the impact, but you don't lose the alcohol,
essence of the drink.
Yeah. So if shochu distilleries want to kind of get in on the trend, then they have to produce the 30 or the 35s.
They have to go closer to Genshu
Yeah.
to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah. Because I think cutting a 25% shochu with you just lose it,
Yeah.
because there's not enough in there for the level of carbonation. You need more soda than you do, if you mix it with water.
So shochu highball, yeah, that's a good tip for home. If you can get your hands on 30, 35%, something closer to Genshu, try that out.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend mixing and kind of playing with it at home, if you can.
Yeah. Shochu highball season is nearly upon us, so I think hopefully we get some more experimentation. I love the citrus, the different brands recommending citrus being added, and hopefully there's a lot more of that on the way.
Yeah.
Well, that is fascinating, Maya. Thank you very much for sharing your little, your niche that you've carved out or found yourself in down in Kagoshima.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to be talking about shochu moving forward.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
And can't wait to see how we can work together in the future in terms of bringing these drinks to thirsty foreign audiences.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Yeah.
I hope we can do a good job. Hope people are interested in it.
I'm sure they will be. It's coming. It's coming very, very soon.
All right, here we are, back again for another session of Sake on Air. My name is Justin Potts, and I will be one of your hopefully friendly, sake navigators for this round. Today we have a very special guest, and we are, as always, broadcasting from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center here in Tokyo. Just a short trip from Tokyo Station here in Toranomon. And for this round, for this session, today I have to my right the master of all things Shochu and Aomori,
The Shochu savant.
The Shochu savant, Sir Christopher Pellegrini.
Thanks for having me.
And our special guest for this session, we're joined by Mr. Jamie Graves, who flew in all the way from New York, to join us. He is the Japanese beverage portfolio manager at Skurnik Wines and Spirits.
That's right.
Among many other things, you have your hand in, or have had your hand in, just about anything and everything in relation to Japanese food and beverage over the years.
Not everything, but anyway, yeah, I'm super glad to be here. Thanks for having me, guys. I've done a lot of different stuff over the years. For whatever reason, I did not plan a career in Japanese food and beverage, but it is, with one or two small exceptions, the only thing I've done since I was like 23 years old. So it's like ended up weirdly becoming a career, like the most kind of unplanned career of all time. But it, yeah,
that seems to be a common theme on this show. How in the heck did you get here? I woke up one day and I
did not plan it this way.
I was surrounded by bottles.
Okay. Yeah. So Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background so that everybody out and around the world knows where you're from.
Great. So I'm originally from New York City. I was born there and grew up sort of there, and then in the sort of New York City area. Went to college in Ohio in central U.S. and I came here a little bit briefly as an exchange student at this place Kansai Gaidai.
We have shared history.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool. And then when I finished college, didn't have any idea of what I wanted to do. The JET program was presented as an option. I was lucky enough to get on that. That was in 2002. I came to teach for a year. And then, just when I was here was really, I mean, I liked the teaching. It was very nice. I worked with a lot of nice people, but I clearly felt it was not something I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but got really into food and thought very long and hard about like, well, if I'm going to stay in Japan, what do I want the most out of this experience? And I was like, I want to understand this food culture as much as I can. So was able to kind of luckily land a few restaurant jobs. At the time, I had a little bit of sort of cooking experience in college for like large groups. So parlayed that with like almost like literally zero restaurant experience into these cooking jobs in Japan. And, one thing led to another, worked at various places, got a ton of experience. My Japanese got real good. I studied a lot with that. I was taking the, standard Japanese proficiency test. And right before I left Japan, I was here for 5 years. Right before I left in 2007, I passed finally the EQ, the highest level of that test, which was kind of a thing I'd been aiming for. It was like, okay, cool. Now my Japan experience is done. Maybe I'll use this Japanese. Maybe I'll be back sometime. Maybe I'll be able to, use Japanese in the future. But at least I accomplished this thing that I can use in the future. And then I went back to the U.S. once again with zero idea of what I wanted to do.
Back to a nice safe place.
Yeah, well, safe place. It was. I moved back in August of 2007, and then 2008 the economy tanked. And I was like, safe place, but I was like, wow, so what now?
Yeah.
Like,
so did you go into restaurants when you got back?
Pretty soon afterwards. I kind of did one or two things, and then purely just to make rent, I was searching Craigslist every day for Japanese listings for translation work.
Okay.
I was just trying to pick up things here and there where I could. And mostly what came up when you search Craigslist for Japanese was restaurants. And then I saw this one listing, just very vague. It said, new vegetarian Japanese restaurant to open in the East Village in New York City, searching for waitstaff. And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. I had been vegetarian for a couple of years, and I was like, well, that sounds interesting. Maybe I'll just work there for a little bit, make some rent, and kind of figure some stuff out. And that ended up being like transformative as an experience. The kitchen staff was this guy, Nishihara-san, very, very good friend. I saw him a couple days ago. He'd come from 10 years at Arashiyama Kicho, which is the 3 Michelin star, considered
Kyoto.
the finest kaiseki in the world in Kyoto. He'd come from 10 years from that. And this was this 28-seat, Shojin Yori vegetarian Buddhist cuisine restaurant in the East Village with like zero fanfare. We opened it up, and his food was just fire. I mean, it was like every month, brand new 8-course tasting menu.
Wow.
Chefs, like all of the top chefs in New York were showing up. Like nobody had any money to spend in 2008. So our dining room was empty most of the time. But the people that were coming were the Japanese expats that were all like, oh my God, this is some of the most authentic food in New York. And then American chefs who were all telling one another, like, you got to check out this guy who's working only with vegetables. This is some of the best stuff I've ever seen. And we thought it was totally normal. We're like, oh, all the top chefs must just check out all the new restaurants.
Right.
Like it was so cute. Like literally everybody on that opening staff, nobody had worked in a restaurant in New York before. Like the Japanese kitchen staff, the wait staff they hired was like myself and a bunch of people. It was great. They hired mostly based on personality and being really nice. So we were all just like, wow, so great. But I mean, the chef's food was just over the top.
charts.
And I just got obsessed with talking to him. He's also like a real history geek and the kind of Japanese culture geek. And he puts almost more so than regular kaiseki, a lot of that stuff into his food. And so was almost very intellectual, but super tasty, really fun. And that just made me really catch the bug. Once again, like that, at that point I was like really excited. And then I was asked to join the opening a few years after that. I'd been working there. Was asked to join the opening of another big kaiseki restaurant called Breaststroke that was opening up. I knew the chef through that scene. I'd also met a ton of people in New York that were all in the Japanese food scene through that restaurant. So all the people selling sake and all the it's kind of like a tight scene over there. Like I really felt, I was like, oh, this is like an industry, or this is like a whole community here. And when I was asked to join that Breaststroke as a manager during the opening, I was like, well, you know what? Let's commit to restaurants as a thing. Let's see where this goes. And if nothing else, I've got this whole Japanese food community here. So if this doesn't work out, it seems like there's other jobs. And that's the first time I'd had that in my life, of feeling like I'm part of something. And even if any one given project doesn't work out, there's a whole network of people here that we can support one another.
And you're all doing food, so you're not going to starve, and you're going to be living on pretty
there
quality fare. And so you were doing restaurants, and you were behind the bar, behind the counter, behind the scenes there.
Yeah.
And now you are working with restaurants from a different angle.
Totally.
You are providing them with delicious Japanese beverages from all over the place, which is why you're here.
That's why I got invited on.
Right.
So I did restaurants for several years in New York. What was it, 2008 to 2017? I guess about 9 years or so. Heard there's this company, great company in New York called Skrnick Wines and Spirits that I had bought from for many years when I was a manager. They carried excellent selection of wines, things like that, spirits. Some of my favorite spirits in New York they carried. I visited their offices when I was a restaurant manager, and just sort of thought like, wow, this is a really cool company. Like they really seem so excited about what they're doing here. And in the back of my mind, when I first met them and visited them, I was like, man, if these guys ever get into sake or shochu, I would love to like be a part of that. And then, just by chance, like about 2 years ago, I heard that they were going to do that. And I pursued the heck out of the job. I was like, I want to, basically we're a wine company. That's how the company started. It was started by my boss, Mr. Michael Skrnick, was just selling kind of small wineries that he had relationships with around New York in kind of the late 80s, and then slowly built that up with his younger brother. The two of them kind of built it up to this kind of great company, but it's built on this passion specifically for stuff that's really tasty. So I find that everybody that works there is first and foremost just really enthusiastic about what we sell, and not really worrying about whether it's cool or not, or whether it's a big name. Like if it's delicious and it's a cool place, like we can really get behind it. So you feel a lot of that at the company, and definitely it's great they've kind of set this culture for that. So to bring when they decided to bring sake and shochu into that, it's just really exciting because they were kind of careful about it. But there's this great response from within the company of that. Really the only reason I have a job is because I know a little bit more than everybody else about sake.
You gotta stay just a few steps ahead.
That's pretty much how it is. Everybody's like, wow, you know so much. I'm like, I just know like just this much more than everybody else. And that's the reason I somehow have a job. So yeah, I'm just kind of the in-house, Japan expert or whatever, at least, or guy who's been to Japan. And so they're like, yeah, you can do this, right? Yeah, sure. Why not?
You can answer these emails that nobody else can read.
So there is that. It's like, well, you can read this language, right? I'm like, yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. Right. So actually, this might take us down a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about before, when you were in restaurants, and now you're shifting over to, or you have already shifted over to a position where you're originally doing wines. So you're in a neat position where all of a sudden you have, network with, different restaurants and different people who maybe wouldn't have thought to put sake on their menu originally, but now you have that sort of reach. At the same time, when you start bringing in Japanese sake, you have to start selling it to people. And so probably the fastest route is to go back to that network that you had,
the Asian,
of the Asian Japanese restaurants. So,
yeah.
But for sake, I think probably a big challenge, probably the next challenge, not just for New York, but internationally, is how to step out of that framework as well too. In your position where you're at now, where does that balance stand, and how are you approaching that? And
well, that's kind of an interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's really our sort of unique position in New York and on the East Coast of the U.S. A bit of what I bring to the table is that knowledge of that Japanese Asian food scene, but in a way that's very crowded. That's who everybody's been selling to up till now.
Sure.
And definitely the dream has been, and I know this from having visited so many sake breweries over the years and developed relationships with a lot of different breweries and people that work at those breweries, and knowing that they get so excited when their sake is not just being sold at maybe a very nice sushi restaurant, but when it's being integrated into a great maybe a creative restaurant in Brooklyn that's kind of breaking boundaries or something, or when it's being sold at some of the great high-end French places, things like that. And that's actually where my company is fairly strong, actually, because I came in to the company brand new. I'd known a lot of people in the broader New York restaurant world, but the Skurnik wines in particular seems to have a lot of cachet at a lot of the high-end restaurants in New York. I mean, these are places that, stories I've heard. Michael Skurnik was selling to these guys himself, 30-something years ago. So the history goes way, way back, and generally the company has kept a very good reputation for that. So what's interesting for me is to just kind of piggyback on that, and I'll get introduced to, a sort of a top restaurant or something, one of the top American style restaurants or French or Italian or something. And because it's being brought by Skurnik, they're willing to hear me out. It's not just kind of like, why are you bringing this sake? Don't waste my time kind of thing. Like, well, it's, you guys generally are good about not wasting my time and bringing good stuff. So let's hear this out. And we've had it's still, I think, just getting started, but we've had a fair bit of success with it for sure.
Said it probably starts a lot of internal education as well too. So you're working with people who have already been working in wine and things like that. So you're probably, before you're going out and selling to restaurants at different places, you're probably also having to do tastings and share with the people within the company and other people who are
for sure
selling your products and stuff as well.
For
too.
sure.
So,
I mean, it's kind of education on all levels. I mean, I really, whoever will talk to me, really, like literally whoever will give me the time. And I like, I mean, people will be like, hey, is it cool if we go talk to this like small, wine shop? They're really interested. And it's like, it's an hour and a half out here. And with one or two exceptions, I've said yes to literally everything, like except with one or two scheduling conflicts. I've basically been like, yep, totally, we'll do it. Anybody who wants to talk to me. And even sometimes knowing that we're building something long for the future, that even if it's kind of a small account that is only going to buy a couple little things, just the fact that they're interested in it, and to be able to go and kind of give them, the most accurate sense that I can, and hopefully conveying some of the passion I have for it as well, I think is super worthwhile. And then, like you mentioned, I mean, so much education within the company that I'm lucky to have all the people within the company, the salespeople, the other brand managers like France and Italy and whatnot. They're all super, super interested in it. And I was actually expecting to walk in and just be like the small guy in the corner that everybody was like, yeah, that's the weird Japan guy. I don't know what he does really. But like from day one, everybody was like, I was felt that I was kind of on the same playing field as everybody else and treated with the same kind of level of, my portfolio, as tiny as it is within the company, was treated with the same level as respect as, France and Italy and all these big ones, which was really pretty encouraging. And the amount of kind of education I have to do on that front is tremendous. But luckily everybody, I mean, it's daunting because the questions I get from these guys are like so detailed and smart. I'm like, I half the time I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. Or like, it's like chemically what's going on here. I'm like, I just don't, I'm sorry, I don't understand enough about the chemistry yet. I'm working on it. But it keeps me really pushing forward. And I honestly feel I'm almost a year and a half, almost 2 years in. And I'm still like, man, I still don't feel like I've given everybody the solid, like, base of sake. Like, it's just, there's never enough time. And then, we do monthly sales meetings where I have to talk to, have to talk to everybody and like present products. And there's just always something else to talk about, something else to do, to the point where I constantly want to go back and do hey, let's just review the basics or talk about, we haven't talked about history too much. Let's get back into that. And, hopefully I'll kind of chip away at that as we go forward. But it's exciting because it's you never feel like your work is done. There's always something going on for sure. Full disclosure to our everybody listening out there. I've known these two guys for a couple years. We go
back a little while.
And I know that, I mean, kind of preaching to the choir here. But particularly what's funny about sake in the U.S., like it's kind of legal status, and that as we all know, it's brewed like beer, drinks like wine. And for example, my company
would be such a bizarre tagline for like sake. I can see like a commercial: brews like beer, tastes like wine. Sake. What is it?
I mean, I've heard people say, like, I'm not the first person to even
absolutely
say it in that tight of a manner.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so for example, legally, like my company, we legally can't sell beer. We're not allowed to, like the way the licensing works and whatnot. I don't fully understand all that stuff yet, but we can't sell beer. And sake, drinks like wine. Everybody's like, oh, it's like a rice wine, right? And legally, it's in this kind of gray zone too, in terms of like, so you guys know, recently New York State got its first sake brewery, Brooklyn Kura, and those guys, I remember talking to them about their kind of licensing process, like how the state could treat them. And it's something like they are, I think, treated as a beer brewery, as like the facility, but then the product they make is like taxed and treated like a wine. So, I mean, particularly it's really confusing because, my company, we're a wine company and we sell sake, but I've always found it easier. And I also come from like, since college, kind of this, probably everybody my own age, who kind of went to college in like the early 2000s, like that was kind of not the beginning, but really when craft beer was coming into its own in the US. And I find that a much more relevant way to think about sake and ways to sell it and explain it to people. Like I've said this a lot to people, like even though it's sold through a wine company, I'm like, I find it much easier to talk to the craft beer people about how they, how that industry kind of developed and how that blew up in the US. I think that's kind of a much easier way to approach it than wine specifically because, say this all the time. I get the question, people are like, what rice is this sake made from? And definitely because of the whole, the way that wines are sold, that you usually divide them up, more often than not, they're divided up by grape varietal, right?
Sure.
Is it like it's Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, blah, blah, blah. So people will naturally think of sake as a wine, and they ask, like, what rice is this made from? And I'll say, like, okay, I'll tell you. But let me just, to maybe help you, God, I'm sounding so condescending right now, to maybe help you out in the future, so you don't mess this up. I mean, it's just like, oh my God, I'm going to hate myself. One thing I've tried to avoid is be that annoying, pretentious wine sake guy.
That's not how to sell sake.
It's not how to sell sake. This, note out there. That's not how to do it. But to sort of say, like, well, that's a good question. Like, here's, it definitely has an influence. But as a kind of analogy, when was the last time you went into a bar and asked, what kind of malted barley to use in this beer? Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess there's the hops thing. People are getting really into like different hops and stuff like that. But it would be great to see if, I'm kind of fantasizing here, if sake, I've always thought about how beer is kind of classified by styles that are not arbitrary exactly, but when I got into brewing beer and getting into it, I realized that, like, for example, like a stout or versus a lager, like there's things that make it that, but those are somewhat artificially drawn categories, but they're based on kind of flavor and the experience of it, right? It's not it's somewhat of a technical thing, but it's more the experience of like, this drinks like a lager, this drinks like a stout. And it would be really cool to see if, I don't think it's something that should be like imposed upon sake styles from on high, saying like making all these styles, but the way that beer styles developed, that naturally Saison came out of where was it, like Belgium, the Netherlands kind of thing, and it was like a yeast that could go well in hot temperatures, and was, from what I understand, served to seasonal farm workers as kind of a way to slake their thirst in the summer, and that's where Saison comes from, and it's a very specific style. And then lager from cold fermentation caves in Germany and from this area and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, cool, that's a lager. And it would be great to see if sake, if it could be kind of expressed in the same way. And that, I think Kimoto Yamahai Nama, it's not perfect, but it's like it's an easier way that if you're getting a Nama, you kind of have a general idea of what it's going to be.
Yeah, it's tough because they're all on different axes, right? And so that's like when you're talking about like the Kimoto Yamahai, it's a good introduction point. But then where you said it doesn't really satisfy, I feel like in a lot of situations, then after that, you still have to explain the Jumai, the Ginjo, the Daiginjo.
Yeah.
And they're all on a different axis. And so you can't tie them all into the same thing, right? So you can look at, say, like the Ginjo, Ginjo, Daiginjo, whatever. But then Junmai and non-Junmai are technically on a different axis. If you look at it from, you're talking about something completely different. It's on the same table, but they're actually two completely different things. I mean, and then you're talking about, starters, and that's a completely different thing from something else. Then you're talking about Nama, which is a completely different, process from something else. And so you've got each of these things that are an individual reference point, but none of them reference one another in any sort of way that, it's really hard to.
And the really annoying part is even if you like line them all up, you're like, this is a, Muroka, I don't know, Namagenshu, Junmai. Even that could have like a ridiculous amount of like variability within that. It's like, oh, we layered all these things on top of one another. This should give us an idea of what it tastes like, right? And you're like, well, I mean, it was interesting. Another thing that's interesting to think about is the idea of regionality, and definitely the whole confusion of sake and wine is something that I think the industry actually really pursued for a long time. And you see, so many breweries that took, and I've talked to so many breweries that really took so much influence from winemakers. Like they took trips to France, to Burgundy, and they got super influenced by these ideas. And now, unfortunately, we don't really get many of these in the States, but these kind of small production things where a brewery will be like, we brewed this sake from a rice only from this one, this one rice patty, and then do like a series of ones, the same way you do single vineyard things in wines, which I think is fairly interesting. But the idea of like regionality, the idea of like, oh, it's a Niigata style sake and Yamagata style sake, and realizing that those are kind of artificially created.
Yeah.
Like one of the funniest things I learned last year on my trip. I came around January of 2018. I took a trip to Japan to visit with a lot of breweries and meet people. And to me, one of the most kind of like aha moments, it was crazy, was talking to a brewery in Yamagata that I work with, Sakata Shuzo, which makes Jokigen.
Yeah.
And Jokigen, I remember I was talking to this guy, Naito-san, who is a really nice guy who works there. And he was like, actually, there was a toji many, many years ago. It's like the Yamagata prefecture wanted to kind of raise the level of Yamagata sake, and they hired this one guy who was kind of like a consultant who went to like all the different breweries, and he had this very kind of specific idea of what good sake was, which was what is now considered Yamagata style sake, that kind of fruity and pretty and floral, and sort of seeing how different breweries will all do variations on that. And he was like, yeah, it's because that one guy came to every brewery and said, this will be the Yamagata style now. And I was like, wait a minute, it was just decided like 20, 30 years ago? And he's like, that's correct. Yeah. So it's really, to me, to think about these like categories and regionality and stuff, there's sort of like a realizing that regionality is like kind of artificial.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I mean, there is that water quality.
Yep.
It's like the water source will help determine the sake, but realizing, just like beer, I tell this to people all the time. It's like, just like beer, you can decide to make whatever kind of sake you want, more or less wherever. Like the limits are kind of off at this point. And it'd be interesting to see if there's a new way of, sorting these things out and categorizing them that, Again, I don't know why I'm coming back to this beer model, but it's like the same way that like lager makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're not the only one. I think that's becoming a more and more common parallel as people start digging into it more, especially when they're having to communicate it to people as well as what you will like. And this is just me personally. And maybe it's because I'm not super well versed in wine. I'm not so much in beer either, but
Sake only.
I experience them all in relatively sufficient, quantities. But it's I tend to find that it's a lot easier for people who have an appreciation for beer. If you figure out what kind of beer they either like or want to drink, it's pretty easy to find a sake that they will latch onto. Whereas I find with wine, it tends to be a bit more challenging. And that's maybe just my personal experience, and I think you're starting to see that here in Tokyo as well. You're starting to see more craft beer bars and pubs starting to serve sake as well too.
We're seeing actually
kind of an interesting trend that you're starting to see, which is nice because you also get a lot more. There are a lot of beer drinkers out there.
Yeah,
it's
a huge thing.
It's a big world.
Yeah, there was somebody, one of the managers of my company, the guy who does Spain. I think he was out at some restaurant and they were drinking beer, and they were like, "Man, these beers just kind of taste the same." And there was a hardcore beer guy there, and he's like, "What are you talking about? All wines taste the same. These taste completely different." And it was like kind of realizing that sort of the world, the sake wine world that I'm in, there is that. Not as much of a connection to the beer world itself, but we've seen a few places in New York who kind of organically, like hardcore beer places, that have reached out for sake because they've kind of done the homework, that kind of thing, and it's kind of brought them to that. I mean, that's as you probably know, Brooklyn Kura. Brandon, who's the brewer there, he was a craft beer guy for years. He did homebrew and then kind of ended up with sake, and I've sort of compared it. I've kind of been hoping that with craft beer, they've almost tapped out all the random weird historical styles you can find. The American craft beer scene, like ripped through, every possible weird historical style. There's like, Dogfish Head found the Midas, possibly the most ancient recipe for beer ever made, blah, blah, blah.
They replicated it.
Yeah, and they replicated it. And it's like, okay, I've kind of felt that we discovered everything. I kind of feel like sake can hopefully be, they sort of find that wait, there's this brewing that's not exactly beer, but it's happening in Japan. And particularly as much as beer people kind of understand brewing and whatnot, and you get to sake and it's like, whoa, this is a whole nother level. It's like you've discovered all that stuff in beer brewing. And then when you get to sake, it's like graduating to, doing like a PhD in this stuff almost.
Well, I think that's why you're starting to see a lot of the breweries, sake breweries overseas, at least the smaller places, either started out in beer or beer was their main gig, and they've branched off to that. It's a very natural, I think, trajectory, as you were saying. And that's one area where I think overseas is going to, in a way, have a hand up on Japan. Whereas in Japan, for those who don't know, you can't brew alcohol on your own. It's not legal to, like, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, in the US, for example, you got people who homebrew all over the place. There's all kinds of DIY, proactive, all this stuff going on. And whereas here, we don't have that. And so as far as the potential for what sake can do, it's going to take a while to get the level of quote unquote quality up there. But man, people are going to start if the beer in the same way that the beer industry, craft beer industry took off and just started, like you said, tearing through stuff and just really experimenting and doing this stuff. If they attack sake with the same type of rigor, it's just going to involve it. Just a ridiculous rate and just all kinds of crazy things are going to come about.
Actually, maybe I know we're kind of tight for time here, maybe,
we got a few more minutes.
Cool.
The loophole.
Getting real nerdy here.
Right. We'll bring that back for another day. And I'm really upset because the main reason I wanted you here was so that we could talk about spirits and stuff like that too.
Oh shoot, we didn't even get to Shochu, man.
Well, we didn't even get to why you're here.
Oh yeah, so this is super exciting. I'm not here alone. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to down to Haneda Airport. I'm going to meet a couple of our salespeople who are flying over from New York, and for all of them, it's their first time in Japan. So these were some people that were able to sell a bunch of stuff last fall. We kind of did a little bit of a friendly kind of sales contest, sort of structured it in a way that would kind of work for everybody. And so it's really cool. We've got these three, American salespeople coming over that have never been to Japan. They've been selling this stuff in New York. They kind of know a little bit. So I'm kind of excited because I love nothing more than somebody like arriving in Japan for the first time and just to see their reactions to everything, to like the brewery culture. I've been really excited to go out drinking with the Kodomoto and these guys and just kind of see like, our reps from New York and New Jersey talking to these super rural Niigata folks. Like I've been fantasizing about this actually. I'm just like, man, my two worlds that I know super well, just collide them together and see what the hell happens. Yeah. Like it's gonna be beautiful. It's gonna be a fun few days.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Jamie, thanks for coming out.
No, this was super fun, guys. Thanks for having me here.
Would you like to share where people can find you on the internets or wherever before you run out of here? If they want to follow your trip here?
Sure. So there's a few different ways to do that. First off, I'm going to be a good company man and plug my company's website. So skurnik.com, SKURNIK.com. Obviously, we just sell in the U.S., but it's a pretty awesome resource. In terms of
your pieces, your sake shochu related stuff on there is really, really great.
Cool.
For our listeners, thank you. It's been very, very enjoyable to actually see somebody writing
tackle
well
shochu?
About some of the stuff. Yeah, shochu, as well as, like I said, less talked about things in sake that are actually just genuinely interesting.
Yeah.
And you've done a really good job of that.
Cool, thank you.
I would like to
appreciate that.
Direct our listeners to that.
I think I figured out how to use Instagram. So I kind of try to keep my Instagram focused on generally sake stuff and kind of, because I know a lot of people, I've told a lot of people like, hey, check this out. Particularly my trip to like document as much about the places I'm visiting and share that back with people in New York. So my Instagram is at Jamie F. Graves. That's at JAM as in Mary IE, F as in Frank, GRAV as in Victor ES.
Again, Jamie, thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Christopher, thank you. And to all of our listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in.
And that's a wrap on one more episode of Sake on Air. If you have any thoughts, feelings, or comments about the show, feel free to track us down at Sake on Air on either Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. You can check us out on YouTube. We will have a lot more content appearing there very shortly. I keep saying that, and it hasn't happened quite yet, but I promise, it is indeed on the way and should be here sooner rather than later. Our questions at sakeonair.com email address is currently undergoing a bit of construction, and that's because we have a few things in the works. We will have a lot more to share here in the coming weeks, so please do stay tuned and follow along. As always, this show was made possible together with the fantastic support of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association, and with brilliant editing work and production assistance from Frank Walter and the team at Export Japan. We'll be back here again in 2 more weeks with a brand new episode. Until then, kanpai!